Let's hope this year's Enemies to Lovers 5x5 goes better than last year's. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing an Enemies to Lovers 5x5. Before we get into anything bookish, however, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what is your worst Enemies to Lovers book that you've read. I need to knock some of these off my TBR, guys. I have so many. So, as I said, this is a 5x5, which is a series on my channel in which I'm trying to find 5-star reads in one video. I have not succeeded thus far, but I will put a link to the series over here if you're interested in checking out my previous videos. As I said, this time around, I'm going to be reading 5 Enemies to Lovers books. So with this, I will give you guys an update at the 50% mark with an estimated rating, followed by a final update with an actual rating. Before we get into those though, let me give you a summary of all the books I will be reading. First up is Satisfaction Guaranteed by Karelia stetz-waters, and this is following two women who are left a sex toy store after one of the women's aunt dies. The two of them are given 1 month to try and make the store successful, and if they don't, it will end up closing. I don't know much more than that. I think the two of them don't get along very well, and of course they end up disagreeing about how the store should be run. I can't wait for this. It sounds like it's just going to be a hilarious time. After that is Well Met by deluca, and this is a new adult series following these two individuals who work at a Renaissance fair. This first one is Enemies to Lovers between our main characters. Emily is a newcomer to town and wants to volunteer at this Renaissance fair because her niece wants to work for it. Simon, however, has been running the fair for many years now and is very dedicated, so he is not happy that Emily is so flippant. But of course, whenever the two are in character during the Renaissance fair, the banter turns to flirting. I am so excited to read this one. I love the setting of a Renaissance fair, and I've heard great things about it from my friend Kat. Next up is The Trouble with Hating You by Sajni Patel. First off, can we please just appreciate how beautiful this cover is? This story is following a young woman whose family tries to set her up with a man. She ends up walking out on him and then unfortunately has to work with him on some kind of a project, and you know, sparks end up flying. I have no idea any more than that. I don't want to know anymore. I've heard good things about this author and I'm very excited to get into this one. Next up is Meet Cute Club by Jack Harbon. This is a indie published romance following our main character, Jordan. He runs a romance book club, but unfortunately for him, the rude bookstore employee who keeps making fun of him for reading romance books comes in one day and decides he wants to try and join, and of course, Jordan is not happy about that. This is pretty short, but it sounds really adorable. I haven't heard anything about this, so I'm really hoping to find a new favorite. Finally, we have The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. I have heard great things about this one and think it sounds very hilarious. This one is following our main character, Lena, who was stood up at the altar when she was going to marry this man. Unfortunately, this was all thanks to her ex-fiance's brother. Well, a few years have passed and now our main character is trying to interview for a new job. Who does she end up having to work with on the interview? Of course, her ex-fiance's brother, who she absolutely detests. I've never read a book where it is the ex's brother situation, so that's going to be interesting. So that is the 5 books I am planning to read, and I will update you guys when I have hit the 50% mark on the first. Hey y'all, so I have officially hit the halfway point into Well Met, and I'm really enjoying this so far. I think we're starting out on a great foot because the Enemies to Lovers in this, fantastic. I am talking, it is constant bickering and banter right up until the first kiss, which takes place nearly at the halfway point. So I'm impressed that deluca managed to stay in that enemies section for so long. This does start out with kind of a poor first impression. Simon is definitely sort of a stick in the mud character, whereas Emily is more light and funny, happy-go-lucky. Family is very clearly important to both of these characters. Simon started the fair alongside his brother, and then on the opposite side, Emily is living in the small town taking care of her sister and her niece. So I do really like that parallel between the two of them, that they have very strong sibling relationships, particularly since I have a really strong sibling relationship with my brother. Whenever they talked about literature, they actually kind of made a little bit of progress into sort of becoming friends and showcase that they do have some things in common. Once they manage out of that enemies territory, they probably could actually get along pretty well. It's just they're both still holding on to this poor first impression of one another so strongly that it's souring the rest of their relationship. While they're actually in character, they flirt constantly and I eat it up. The chemistry between them is fantastic, I will say. It's really addicting. Simon's character is Captain Ian and he is a pirate, and man, I am so into into it, he is super sultry and very confident, full of himself, and I'm here for it. I'm here for that change. While as Emily is a bar wench named Emma, and I don't think her personality really differs all that much, but Simon finally gets out of his shell a little bit when he's in character. It's just making their interactions all the better. One thing I will say in terms of a negative, and I don't even know if I would really call this a negative, it just sort of is because I have so much experience with romance books at this point, is that this book reads a little young. To be fair, Emily is only 25, which is literally a year older than me, so I guess I can't say that too lightly. At times she will come across as sort of immature. Other times Jen DeLuca will put in little one-liners here and there to sort of remind us that no, she's not a high schooler, she is an adult. Usually in terms of her complaining about body aches, which, I mean, I'm just saying, I probably would have been sore working a 10-hour day in a Renaissance fair in the middle of summer with that costume on at 17, let alone at 25. So does it really count as maturing her? I don't know. Like I was saying with their familial relationships, both of them tend to take on a lot of responsibility. Simon is very invested in this fair going off without a hitch. He really wants to stay true to the fair that his brother created to try and make him proud. Emily is definitely trying to find her place in the world, still figuring out who she is as a person without her ex-boyfriend. So with all of that being said, estimated rating, I think I'm gonna go with a solid 4-star at this point. I am having a really great time. I have a few like little nitpicky things here and there, but all in all though, very positive. I don't ever want to estimate 5 stars anymore though, because it just never works out. So we're gonna go with a 4-star right here and hope for the best. Hey y'all, so I've officially finished out Well Met by Jen DeLuca, and this was really cute, really freaking sweet. I adored the setting of the Renaissance Fair. It's making me very excited to go to a Renaissance Fair again this summer. I also do think I'll probably continue the series, so that kind of gives you a little bit of a spoiler for where my rating's gonna be around. The third act drama though. It's something we know happens in romance books, but it can be handled well and it can be handled not, and I think it was not handled well in this. Without getting into spoilers, it just felt very overblown. This is because up until this point, we have seen that both characters are dealing with past baggage. I understand that. I think that made them more realistic people, but when it comes to the big conflict, all of the attention is focused on Simon's issues, and it's as though Emily's baggage has just disappeared. I think if we had seen from Simon's perspective, we would have seen him growing, and then also probably would have had the chance for him to acknowledge the fact that Emily has her own issues she needs to work on just as well. All in all, I just didn't really like that Simon was so vilified for trying to maintain this memory that he has for his brother. It just rubbed me the wrong way. On top of that, I also kind of got whiplash from Emily's characterization. At some points, she was all about communicating. She was asking the right questions. She wanted to ensure everyone was on the same page. At other points, when conflict was needed, she was terrified of talking. She did not want to know the answer. She just wanted to stay blissfully unaware. At one point, she literally runs away from Simon rather than sit down and communicate with him like an adult. It was just very frustrating that we were showcased her in one way and then she changes like that to the opposite with literally no real reasoning except to utilize the miscommunication trope. It was so annoying. If we had literally just removed the third act conflict, I think I probably would have put this at a 4 stars, but because of that, it's more like a 3.75 according to my Cawpile breakdown. All in all though, did have a fun time. Hey y'all, so I have officially hit the halfway point into The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa, and our heroine, I'm really liking her characterization. She is inherently a very emotional person, but she bottles that up because she doesn't want to come across as the stereotypical angry black woman. However, doing so is actually starting to hurt her professionally and is even leaking into her personal life, which is not necessarily a great thing. She's very compelling, she's quite likable. On top of that, I adore her Brazilian culture that's being brought in as well. There's tons of Portuguese language drops, so many mentions of delicious food that honestly is making me hungry whenever I read this. Plus, I adore her big Brazilian family and the dynamics between all of them. Hilarious. On the opposite side with our hero Max, he is very patient, he is very charming, he's compassionate, he has pretty good chemistry with Lena, but he's kind of boring. He's almost too perfect. Even though we're seeing from his perspective, I don't feel like he really has that much personality, even though he's the one who's technically responsible for Mia's ex-fiance calling off the wedding. He doesn't seem real. I don't really think we're getting anything important in seeing from his perspective, apart from furthering Lena's character, ironically. However, the past drama has led to some very entertaining scenes. Lena has played some pretty petty pranks on Max, and honestly, my petty heart adores it. It's so entertaining. I've seen other people who complained that it made the character seem really immature, but I guess that's just up to personal taste. There's tons of banter between the two of them. I do think there's pretty good chemistry written out. For the time being, we tend to volley back and forth between either contempt for one another to not quite friends. There was a moment of tension. I can't really say with those though that I've actually felt enough to be convinced by them having a relationship with one another. Also, I just have to put this out there. The male audiobook narrator, he's not great. Man cannot do a woman's voice to save his life. It's kind of painful and a little grating on the ears. So, estimated rating thus far. I'm not really sure. In terms of romance, I don't think I like this enough for a 4 stars. As I said, I'm just not terribly convinced that a relationship could develop between the two of them. I'm kind of looking at a 3 stars for the time being. I definitely hope that this could build to something more and I could end up loving it. Hey y'all, so I officially finished out The Worst Best Man, and you know how I said in the first update that Max was kind of boring? Well, we finally got a little bit more depth from him. We learn that he has this constant competition with his brother Andrew, who is engaged to Lena, which has thus led to him feeling inadequate in a lot of his life. I like the depth, but all in all, I still just think he was kind of boring for a hero. I just didn't really care about having his perspective. I honestly think we could have done better without it. That being said though, this book was incredibly entertaining when it came to the fact that our two main characters get themselves into all of these ridiculous situations where, because they don't particularly like each other, it makes everything 10 times more hilarious. On top of that, I also really want to praise the fact at no point was miscommunication used in this. They actually spoke to one another like adults, and it was very refreshing to see that. At no point was conflict due to them not talking. That being said though, I don't think this had nearly enough tension to satisfy me in terms of this being an enemies to lovers trope. I think looking back, they do actually transition into the friends territory pretty quickly. Even at the beginning when they still don't particularly like each other, most of their bickering almost feels flirtatious, so I just felt like we didn't get enough push and pull between Lena and Max, unfortunately. Once they sleep together, which I will say, nice and spicy, like 2 peppers worth. Although they label their relationship as not that serious and no strings attached, they jump right into acting coupley pretty quickly, so it kind of just felt very unusual in terms of a transition from enemies to friends to lovers. Of course, there was a third act conflict, but I do have to say what it was fit perfectly with the premise of this book and the basis of the relationship between our two main characters. In the end, very cute. I just don't really know if I have a ton of faith in this relationship lasting because of all of the drama from their past. After running this baby through Compile, although it was a very satisfying rom-com, I did settle on only 3 stars, unfortunately. I just don't think there was anything in this that was particularly outstanding to me, apart from Lena as a character. Honestly, I would probably say a majority of the higher scores on Compile were due to Lena and her perspective. 'Tis a shame, not a new favorite enemies to lovers, but I still would recommend this. Hey y'all, so I officially hit the halfway point into Satisfaction Guaranteed, and I swear somebody sold this to me as enemies to lovers, but I don't necessarily know if that's the best trope to describe this as. It feels more like opposites attract. There's a little bit of like a friends to enemies to lovers kind of thing going on. Plus there's a fake dating / relationship aspect also. Yeah, this is a lot of tropes. Right out of the gate, when our first 2 main characters meet, it is very clear that they are really different people. They have very different personalities. Cade is straight-laced, professional, butch sort of girl. She has come from a very kooky, eccentric family. She's not had the best relationship with sex, whereas for Selena, she's a former wild child. She's attempting to get her life together, and in doing so has sworn a vow of celibacy. She is desperate to keep the sex store running because it is basically all she has in her life now. Whenever it comes to trying to ensure that this store succeeds, Cade is very much professional, trying to figure out how to rebrand it, make it new, make it better, whereas 𝗖mě is trying to keep everything the exact same, which is this weird, kitschy sort of selling odds and ends things alongside sex toys, and she is just wanting to keep it as a remembrance of Ruth, the woman who passed it down to the both of them. Both of them are determined to get things up and running. However, they don't see eye to eye, and that's sort of where the enemies aspect starts to come in. However, it's fairly short-lived. They pretty soon actually communicate their feelings and start to shift back into friends territory. So I don't really know if friends to enemies to lovers is really the best way to sell this book. Unsurprisingly, with the main plot revolving around a sex store, this story is pretty sex positive. There's many sex organ and kink terminology being dropped in during random conversations, which kind of just makes the entire book feel like it is borderline ridiculous. And that means that I am cracking up quite often, having a great time. The fake relationship aspect comes about because 𝗖mě has a toxic and a manipulative ex-girlfriend who is trying to weasel her way back into 𝗖mě's life, but 𝗖mě is trying to ensure that that can't happen, so she lies and says that she is engaged to Cade. Thankfully, this is pretty small in the grand scheme of the book. There's a little bit of awkwardness, but across the board, it's not really taking away from my enjoyment, thankfully, since we all know that's not really a trope I like. So in the end, I don't really know if I would characterize this as a enemies to lovers book, which definitely gave me some concern in terms of including it in the video whenever I realized this, but this is what I had planned, so I am very sorry. In terms of estimated rating, I am gonna give this 4 stars. I'm enjoying it a lot. It's very fun. It's pretty ridiculousness. It does not take itself very seriously. Hey y'all, so I've officially finished out Satisfaction Guaranteed by Karelia stetz-waters, and continued to not really be an enemies to lovers book, unfortunately. That's the book I had picked for this video, so we're just gonna work with it. Honestly, I didn't really have a lot of new feelings about the second half of this book. I still thought it was pretty funny. I had a great time with it. I was expecting enemies to lovers, which has some tension, and I am all about that angst, but unfortunately, pretty much any conflict in this book was due to outside forces acting on the couple, so I wasn't the biggest fan of that. All in all, I just didn't really feel terribly invested in Cade and 𝗖mě's relationship. It felt like things were a bit too easy. That being said, unsurprisingly, since this is such a sex-positive book, it was also quite spicy. I'm gonna go with like 3 peppers on this one. One thing I did really enjoy in the second half, however, was the growth we saw from both of our main characters. It seemed like their growth came about because of the influence they had on one another, but wasn't due to the fact that they were in a relationship, so I appreciated that distinction. 𝗖mě finally grew up a little bit and stood up to her ex, which I loved, holding her accountable for being toxic and manipulative, and especially taking advantage of her situation. At the same time, 𝗖mě also allows herself to fall back in love with her passion for painting, and I really enjoyed seeing that. On the opposite side with Cade, she finally let loose a little bit. She realized that just because her family put her in this persona of being the responsible one doesn't necessarily mean she constantly has to fit that exact persona. And though, like I said, I wasn't terribly invested with the two of them as a couple. Things just seemed a little bit too easy. The ending in particular was very cheesy. I love a good grand gesture moment, but I don't know, this one just seemed a bit too unrealistic given that the two of these characters have known each other for maybe a month. I don't know, it just seemed a little too out there, even by rom-com standards. As for a rating, I think I estimated 4 stars in my expectation, but I think this is actually more of like a 3.75 when I put it into Caw pile. So technically speaking, I don't really do 0.75s very often, meaning we're gonna go with a 3.5 stars. It was a good book, just not a new favorite romance, but definitely a very quick, easy read. The audiobook was also very well done, would recommend that. Hey y'all, so I've officially hit the halfway point into Meet Cute Club by Jack Harbon. Let me just get this like one little negative thing out of the way, because then I'm gonna jump into my squealing. This is alternating perspectives, and unfortunately there is nothing to showcase to you in the page that you have changed perspectives. It literally just shifts from one paragraph to the next, and you have to pick up based on what character's name is being utilized more often, I suppose. On top of that, both of our characters do kind of have similar voices, so it's pretty hard to distinguish whose perspective you're gonna be in whenever the both of them are together. That's my biggest con right now. Apart from that though, I'm having a great time with this book. It is so cute. Jordan over here is our book club leader, and he is a romantic. He is sweet and sensitive, but he doesn't like to show that to people. He is very dedicated to ensuring that this book club will succeed, and he will have a bunch of members who he can share his love of romance stories with. He is such a sweetheart. He is very willing to defend romance books to anyone who has a bad thing to say about them, including Rex over here, who is a typical bad boy, honestly, if you look at him. But he works at a bookstore, he has a really great relationship with his little sister, and he is also pretty charming, I have to say. He does, however, tend to tease people quite a bit. So whenever he teases Jordan, who came in to buy some romance books, in what I think was actually supposed to be flirting, unfortunately, Jordan takes it in a negative way and quite quickly hops up on his soapbox. Rex is so impressed by this that he wants to join the book club as well as get closer to Jordan, so he ends up buying the books that Jordan bought as well, and then ends up showing up to one of the book club meetings. It is so freaking cute, y'all. Really like that basis for our two main characters being enemies. The banter is very fun, and as I'm at the halfway point, we are going more and more into flirting, and I'm so here for that. I am pretty impressed with, given how short this book is, that Jack Harbon is actually giving us a friends stage in our enemies to lovers. They have kissed, but nothing really has come from that. And now Rex is trying to help Jordan ensure that his book club succeeds, so I really love that we are getting a smooth transition from enemies to friends to lovers. There's even some depth here past the actual romance. Jordan is definitely a romantic, however, he is having a really hard time feeling fulfilled in his daytime job and is just wanting to put all of his passion into this book club. On the opposite side, Rex's father is a serial adulterer, so he is definitely more of a realist, and his grandmother recently died, which is what brought him to the town in the first place. Like I said, their voices aren't incredibly distinct, but I do enjoy both of their personalities. What with my one negative and the fact that that's kind of important when you're alternating perspectives, I can't estimate a 5 stars on this, but I am having a great time with it, so I think I'm gonna go with an estimated 4-star rating for now. I'm really hopeful we will stay there. I don't know if maybe I'll just get more used to their voices as the story continues, and possibly we could bump higher. Hey y'all, so I've officially finished out Meet Cute Club by Jack Harbon, and you know how I was praising this for having a friends section when it was so short? Yeah, that lasted for about 10 more pages and then they slept together. So the pacing from that point on, little odd. It just seemed as though we jumped into them doing some pretty serious coupley things very fast, even though technically speaking, the book is fairly short. It does span a good few months, we are told, but it just didn't make sense for what we were seeing that they went into such a serious relationship so quickly. And then the third act drama just came out of nowhere. It was incredibly sudden. It didn't really feel like it made sense by that point. I almost wish that instead of this following the classic romance book plotline, that this had just taken the time to develop them from enemies into friends and then to lovers and just end on a final love declaration. I think that would have been a lot better. At the very end, since there was a third act drama, of course there was a grand gesture moment, and it was very sweet, it was very cute, it was pretty unrealistic if I'm being honest, and the cheese, it was there. By that point, I also was just expecting more depth and development from both of our main characters, even though this was a short book. At the beginning, we got to know more about them, but by the end, it felt like we hadn't really learned anything apart from that stuff we had already been introduced to. My ending thoughts are that this book is simple, it's cute, it's to the point. It almost gives you that same kind of feeling like you get with fan fiction, where it's a quick read and it's satisfying. You know you're gonna enjoy it. So because of all of that, I think I went with a 3 stars on this one. Wasn't anything out of this world, but it was a very adorable story and I did have a good time. I think I went with 2 chili peppers, 3 chili peppers, somewhere around there. Let's go with like 2.5. That sounds good.
Hey guys, so I'm on my lunch break and I thought I would update you because I've hit the halfway point into The Trouble with Hating You by Sajni Patel, and right out of the gate I thought this was going to be more rom-com-y, but this is a lot more serious and heavier than I was anticipating, but not because of the romance, more because of outside factors affecting said romance, I suppose. At the beginning of the book, we learn that 𝗖ic's father is verbally abusive and that he is trying to pressure her into having a more traditional Indian lifestyle to the point of being manipulative about it. In fact, her parents ambush her to have dinner with a suitor who is our main male character, Jay, with his mother. That's where our enemy's territory begins. 𝗖ic's anger at her father also bleeds into Jay, and Jay is angry at 𝗖ic for embarrassing his mom by running out. This is only worsened whenever 𝗖ic goes to work the following day and finds out that her company has actually hired Jay as a lawyer to help them with some legal trouble. On top of that, we also eventually find out that 𝗖ic is actually shunned by a majority of the Indian community in her area, and some really nasty rumors are going around about that. I'm not really going to say any specifics due to spoilers, but you might possibly want to look up some content warnings. 𝗖ic is a strong, opinionated, independent woman, and she will let you know that. However, she definitely is dealing with some trauma that she probably should be going to therapy for, but I don't think she is. While on the opposite side, Jay honestly seems like a pretty nice, sweet, down-to-earth guy, but he's definitely dealing with his own inner demons. Thus far, I really love whenever our two main characters interact. They know how to push one another's buttons really quickly. They bicker, they banter. It's very entertaining, not to mention the fact that they can both admit that they are attracted to one another, which always just adds another layer of fun to an enemies to lovers situation. We had started to shift into the friends territory by this point, but unfortunately 𝗖ic's trauma and her poor experiences with men in the past has resulted in a pretty serious argument, and we've quickly backslid to enemies again. Both of our main characters in this book are Indian, and the cultural aspects of this so far is pretty interesting. With the side characters, you can see there are some of them who are trying to still continue a very traditional lifestyle. There are others who are trying to be more progressive and mix Indian tradition alongside American customs. And then we have 𝗖ic over here, who is almost trying to completely separate herself from her Indian culture. While I do think it's interesting to see these differences between all of the characters in the story, I will say I'm not Indian, I am not Hindi, and I have seen from some Desi reviewers that this is not the most accurate representation of a Indian American lifestyle. So I would definitely recommend going to check out some Own Voices reviews, and I'll put a link to a couple of those in the description down below. Ignoring the fact that this was a lot heavier than I was anticipating, I think my biggest gripe so far is the way feminism is handled in this story. It is so ham-fisted, it is very preachy, and I do not appreciate it. Particularly if it's a piece of dialogue, it just seems so incredibly unrealistic, and like no one would ever speak that way, that it just comes off as incredibly cringy. This is the book club pick I do with my two best friends, and one of them has already finished it. She said that it does get a little less preachy as the book continues, which I'm really hopeful for, and I'm waiting. Apologies, the angle might have changed a little bit. I had to answer a phone call. But with all of that being said, I think my estimated rating for the time being is somewhere between a 3.5 and a 4 stars. I'm not really sure. There's aspects of this book I am enjoying a lot, but there's other parts I just don't really like. I don't know, I'm having a hard time settling on what my feelings are going to be, especially since I've been told that the ending of the book is a lot better than the beginning. So let's hope for the best and go with an estimated 4 stars, hopefully. Maybe that'll work out well.
Hello again. So I have also officially finished out The Trouble with Hating You by Sajni Patel, and I think I enjoyed the enemies stage of this book the most. The flirting, the banter, that was so much fun, but once we officially hit lovers and they were a couple, I was kind of bored. The spark that was there, the chemistry, it had all kind of just dissipated. I feel terrible saying that because by that point in the book, they were happy as a couple, but I just felt kind of meh about them. I don't know what that says about me, but also I'm kind of surprised given how much sex was talked about in this book and how often Leah's purity was brought up, that this was maybe like 0.5 chili pepper on the spice scale. Really didn't have all that much. My friend was correct. The dialogue around the feminist issues in this did get a lot better in the second half. It didn't feel quite so in your face. It did seem a little bit more nuanced. I think a big part of that is because the narrative around 𝗖cie and her past had really changed for us as we had gotten to know her more by this point and understood why this situation was happening. There was also a final confrontation that had to do with that. I'm not really going to get into specifics, but it did give a feeling of closure, and I really enjoyed how that was handled. It also felt like it came about more naturally by that point in the story. Plus, we know I love serious issues being brought up in my romance books, so of course that ticked that box for me. In terms of the writing, something I caught on was that the personalities we would see would be very different depending on whose perspective we were in. For example, if we were in Leah's perspective, she was very assertive, but that was not followed through in Jay's, whereas Jay came across as insanely cocky in Leah's perspective, but not so in his own. It was really weird. I guess you could argue that it's the difference between how you perceive yourself and how other people perceive you, but for me as the reader, it just made it very difficult for me to get a solid feel as to what these characters' personalities were, even by the end of the book. Even though I knew exactly what the third act drama was likely going to be, I have to say it did make perfect sense for the book. It made perfect sense for our characters and for the natural progression of where their relationship was going to be going. Thankfully, it also was not terribly drawn out like some books do, and it did come with a very sweet ending grand gesture moment. I think in the end for this, my compile breakdown was at 3.5 stars. There were some things I really liked and there are just some things I didn't particularly like. Overall, I'm not 100% sure on if the author's writing is my favorite. I do still want to try out her next book, which is First Love Takes Two or something along those lines, which is second chance romance. So I'll give her another shot. So in the end, yes, this year's Enemies to Lovers video went a lot better than last year's where I DNF'd 2 books, but that being said, I don't know if I would really constitute any of these as new favorites. I definitely enjoyed all of them across the board, but I think in the end, almost all of these ended up being in the 3-star range, which is kind of unfortunate for me, but I do still have a ton of other Enemies to Lovers books on my TBR, so if you are interested in seeing a round 3 of this video, please let me know in the comments down below. As always, thanks so much for coming to my channel today, guys. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!